What echoes remain when even the Emperor's light abandons a legion? The question trembles through the resurrected chronicle like a dying star's last convulsion, its syllables older than any living tongue now permitted within the Imperium's walls. Across the void's coward parchment of memory, a shape emerges, a legion once known, then unspoken, then erased by decree. Their banners now long reduced to drifting ash, once marched beside demigods. Their oaths were carved into the bones of worlds. And yet, as the millennia drowned them beneath sanctioned silence, the galaxy itself seemed to warp around their absence, as if reality feared the truth of what they once were. The first scene stirs from shadow. A shipwrecked relicarch drifting beyond the Astronomican's final reach. Its hull bitten open by time. Within its darkened, monumental corridors, lumen glyphs sputter awake for the first time in 10,000 years, illuminating frescoes depicting the Great Crusade's earliest conquests. Among the familiar primarch, visages giants of legend, warriors of divine wrath, an erased silhouette stands where a figure should be. Only faint chisel scars remain, as if chiseled away violently in an age of purging. The pixelate guardians hum as if in protest, struggling to stabilize images forbidden by ancient censure. A faint vox chant rises, not from any living throat, but from the ship's decayed archives. Prayers in a dialect last spoken before the heresy itself, hymns to a legion that marched in perfect loyalty, but vanished before treachery ever had a name. The runes shudder, trying to lock on to a designation. Each attempt dissolves into static. The chronicle turns to the burning plains of Paramar V, where loyalist titans once strode across iron deserts. Here, the ghost of a memory returns, a squadron of gold-edged Astartes fighting beneath an unmarked banner. Their movements precise, their armor-bearing script of unknown dialect but unmistakably imperial in origin. They move with grim certainty, as if bound to some unseen oath no record now remembers. In the sky above them, a Mechanica monitor spirit wails, detecting gene signatures matching no surviving legion. The data stream abruptly cuts off their redacted, scorched by decree of Malcador himself, yet the archive refuses to die. Embers of forbidden truth bleed through the sensors, forming fragmented whispers of a name half erased from the warp. Scene after scene grows darker, pulling the viewer deeper into the vault of forgotten wars. In the blasted catacombs beneath the ruined moon of Calth, a lone ultramarine's chronomancer, once reported strange phantoms drifting through the radiation storm's warriors in pre-heresy plate, marching in formation toward a destination long buried beneath molten stone. Some bore grievous wounds impossible for mortals to endure, as if death itself refused to claim them. When the chronomancer attempted contact, the phantoms vanished into the dust, leaving only faint boot prints leading into a collapsed maintenance shaft sealed since the heresy's earliest hours. His final report ended with, "They do not know they are gone." The record ends abruptly after that. The scribe ruled unstable and reassigned to penal service, yet the footprints were real. The next vision unfurls aboard a black ship crossing the Pale Scar. Psychers bound in null shackles convulse in unison as a single image erupts, across their shared nightmare, an unclaimed fortress monastery, drifting in the void, still lit by functioning lumen towers despite being declared lost before the scouring. The Psychers scream as they speak of statues standing vigil in its Hall of Triumph. 19 statues instead of 18. The extra one depicts a primarch no one remembers, his nameplate sheared clean, though its broken script matches records seen only in the Emperor's private vault. The Psychers who saw the vision burned out their own eyes in despair, claiming the statue turned to look at them. The black ship's logs marked the event as warp-induced hysteria, but its astropathic choir later went completely silent for 7 hours. The last sound captured was a whispered legionary creed no existing force claims as their own. The chronicle drifts again, this time to the dust-choked ruins of Zorith Prime. Here, Inquisitorial Kill Team discovers a bunker not mapped on any sanctioned chart. Inside, rows of decayed sarcophagi, each etched with a legion numeral deliberately defaced. One sarcophagus still glows faintly. As the Inquisitors approach, its machine spirit attempts awakening, not to release a dreadnought, but to project an ancient message. The hololithic emitter stutters, revealing a dying Astartes captain, his armor torn by warp fire. With labored breaths, he warns, "We never turned. We were simply hidden." The message collapses before revealing more. The Inquisitors seal the bunker and sentence all present to collective amnesia protocols. but one guardsman survivor later claims he saw additional sarcophagi deeper inside, filled not with corpses, but with living warriors suspended in time. The next scene compresses into the haunted nights of Terra itself. Deep within the forgotten subvaults beneath the Imperial Palace, servo skulls glitch as they pass a rusted door warded by sigils predating the siege. A tech priest archivist once demanded access, citing anomalous energy readings. He was denied. Later that night, he recorded a faint metallic march echoing from behind the sealed gate, the tread of power-armored boots moving in perfect formation. No entry logs suggest any detachment stationed there. When he returned with additional personnel, the sounds had ceased, but dust patterns suggested recent movement. Some claimed to see the imprint of a legionary gauntlet upon the gate. The High Lords dismissed it as atmospheric vibration. The tech priest was reassigned to Martian Auspec's maintenance, a demotion he did not survive more than 2 weeks. Another vision erupts. The Eye of Terror itself, where visions of the past sometimes bleed into the future. A thousand-sun sorcerer, trapped in a prison of his own making, once described a formation of Astartes marching through the warp with no corruption, no mutation, no madness, utterly pure. Their armor shimmered between forms, as if the warp struggled to define them. Each carried a relic standard, bearing a sigil that even the sorcerer, master of forbidden archives, could not decipher. They marched neither toward chaos nor away from it, but parallel to time itself, traversing a road mortals cannot perceive. Before the sorcerer was consumed by Dizinch's flames, he uttered one final confession. They seek the moment they were stolen. The archivist within the Relicarch continues to unravel truths. Now we witness a battlefield frozen in stasis somewhere along the ghostly border of the Ghoul Stars. Here, 2 phalanxes of unknown Astartes face one another, locked in eternal conflict. One bears heraldry reminiscent of the Great Crusade's earliest years. The other is corrupted, bearing warp-scorched versions of the same symbols, as though the Legion had fought its own fallen reflection. Records suggest the stasis field activates whenever Imperial vessels approach, hiding whatever truth lies within. But once, for a heartbeat, an Imperial frigate caught a full image before the field reactivated. It showed a primarch figure standing between both armies, his face blurred, his armor unlike any known design. He lifted a gauntlet hand toward the stars, not in command but in warning. The next chapter emerges from the ravaged corridors of the Noctis Labyrinth on Mars. Here, Forbidden Cogitator awakened briefly during a crimson eclipse. It spat out a single encrypted file bearing the sigil of the Emperor's earliest personal retinue. The machine spirit released 4 seconds of corrupted audio, a legionary chant invoking loyalty to the Imperium. Uttered in a dialect used only before the creation of the Codex Astartes, machine priests attempted to purge the file, but every purge caused additional fragments to appear. One fragment contained coordinates that do not correspond to any known star system. Another contained a blurred visage of an unidentified primarch, whose features resembled several of his brothers yet matched none fully. The file was eventually sealed beneath a triune order from the Fabricator General, the Grand Provost Marshal, and an unmarked sigil believed to be the Emperor's own. The chronicle reopens upon a dying shrine world, where a lone sister of battle reports a vision during prayer. The stained glass mural depicting the Primarchs flickered and for a moment showed an additional figure among them, his blade raised in sorrow rather than triumph. She claimed the Emperor himself wept in the mural, a single droplet of divine tears falling onto the forgotten Primarch's helm. Her canonist declared it hallucination brought by warp exposure, but the sister's armor later manifested a new purity seal she did not place, inscribed with a creed matching the psychic choir's earlier nightmares. She was reassigned to deep penance, though some believe the ecclesiarchy feared she had witnessed something forbidden even to them. In the Relicarch's final scenes, the archive at last dares to show the moment the Legion vanished. The picked feed reconstructs a cataclysmic flash, not warp energy, but something colder, more precise, as if history itself had been excised. A fleet of unknown configuration rises from the void, their banners dissolving into nothingness as temporal shears carve across reality. The Legion does not die, they simply blink out, erased mid-march, their final steps continuing into a place beyond time. A faint echo remains, a promise sworn to the Emperor, a vow unbroken, despite the galaxy forgetting their existence. The chronicle begins to fade. The lights aboard the relicark flicker, dying one by one. But just before the final lumen extinguishes, a single vox channel crackles open. A voice, unmistakably Astartes, whispers through the static, "We are returning." Then silence. Except for one last sound, the heavy, synchronized tread of approaching boots. The relicark's dying vox faded into a hush so complete it seemed the void itself held its breath. Yet from that suffocating silence rose a tremor, not sound, but memory, a vibration older than the Imperium. It drifted into the minds of those who dared remain aboard, threading through fractured recollections like incense smoke trailing across forgotten altars. A veteran of the Cadian 122nd, eyes hollowed by a lifetime of war, felt a presence brushing his thoughts, disciplined, resolute, impossibly ancient. He whispered a prayer to the Emperor, but the answer that returned was not divine. It was the echo of drilled cadence, the rhythm of a legion erased. And in that moment he understood a terrible truth. Some ghosts do not haunt the living, they judge them. In the ecclesiarchal halls of Ophelia 7, the augur bells wailed in discordant fury. Confessor collapsed mid-liturgy, his sermon unraveling into cryptic pleas. The forgotten walk, and they do not bow. The congregation fled, fearing war possession. Yet the canoness superior watched with a colder dread. She had dreamt the same phrase the night prior, spoken by a figure wreathed in gold-washed armor, devoid of heraldry. The dreamscape had shattered at his touch, temples dissolving into ash, as if truth itself could not survive his presence. Doubt crept beneath her rosarius, like a serpent, whispering that faith may falter not because of heresy, but because of revelation. On Luna's fortified bastions, a custodian paused before a sealed vault marked with sigils from the Unification Wars. He sensed a shift, subtle, like a breath behind him, though no warrior of the 10,000 would admit fear. His guardian's spear hummed in warning. For an instant, the vault's adamantium surface flickered, revealing another layer beneath it, a mural of 20 warriors, not 18. The image bled away as quickly as it had come, but the custodian felt something he had never felt since the Emperor marched at their side: uncertainty. He considered sounding the alarm, but to do so would acknowledge what he had seen. And custodians do not hallucinate. Across the void rifts of the Pale Scar, an Imperial Navy cruiser intercepted a drifting signal, a voxium sung in perfect, disciplined harmony, the dialect unmistakably pre-heresy. The choirmaster tried to triangulate the source, but every reading contradicted the next, as if the hymn resonated from multiple temporal coordinates. Worse still, several officers unconsciously began reciting the harmonies, speaking words they could not possibly know. A junior ensign claimed she felt watched through the stars themselves, as though a legion's worth of unseen eyes evaluated her worth. When the hymn ceased, several crew members retained faint memories of battles they never fought against foes who have no record in Imperial archives. Command declared mass hysteria, but the ensign dreamed that night of marching beside giants with hollowed faces. On Terra, within the vaulted dread of the Senatorum Imperialis, political tremors began to ripple. Rumors moved like surgical blades between the High Lords, restricted archives flickering open without command, phantom sigils appearing on astropathic manifests, reports of Astartes bearing no known allegiance observed at the edges of Imperial space. The Grand Provost Marshal dismissed the claims as data corruption. Master of the Administratum did not. He knew of the disappearances, scribes, archivists, even a junior inquisitor, all vanishing after attempting to cross-reference the same forbidden designation. Yet none dared speak aloud the possibility that something long excised had begun rewriting its place in history. Deep within the Noctis labyrinth, a Magos of the Ordo Reductor awakened a dormant forge spirit tied to the Emperor's earliest warforges. It projected fractured hololiths of a legion deploying alongside the Luna Wolves during the Great Crusade, imagery forbidden, impossible, heretical. The Magos dared not look away. One figure among them turned slightly, helm tilting as if aware of being observed across millennia. The Magos felt his biomechanical heart shudder. When he moved to purge the image, the hololith reacted violently, projecting a new fragment too quickly to intercept. A primarch silhouette reaching toward a void tear, as though begging to be remembered. That was the moment the forged spirit detonated. On the shrine world of Ethenia, a penitential procession halted as the sky rippled with a distortion not of warp, but of history. For a heartbeat, the clouds parted to reveal an orbital fortress unknown to any imperial chart, hanging impossibly low. A cluster of Astartes descended in formation, armor gleaming with sigils resembling both the Emperor's and none of his line. Witnesses swore their presence ignited a primal memory, as though humanity had known them once and lost them on purpose. When the distortion snapped shut, dozens fell to their knees in wordless awe, and dozens more fled in terror, convinced they had seen angels long abandoned by God. Aboard the relic ark itself, the surviving crew huddled in a cathedral-like chamber as the sound returned, the synchronized tread of approaching boots. The air grew thick, heavy with ionized ozone and something older than fear. Lumen strips flickered as shadows lengthened unnaturally, contorting into towering silhouettes. One by one, rune panels activated themselves, displaying fragments of lexicons forbidden since the heresy. A mechanicus adept, trembling, whispered, "These scripts are stable. They are not warp echoes." Then the chamber doors began to move, not pushed by engines, but as though acknowledging a rightful owner. On Barbarus's necrotic winds, a Death Guard warband encountered an abandoned stronghold, bearing architectural traits from the Unification era. Inside, they found murals depicting a battle Mortarion never spoke of a war waged beside a legion whose emblem had been savagely scraped away. One Plague Marine, older than most chapters, approached a mural showing a primarch he did not recognize leading them. For a moment, the corrupted warrior felt something pitiable flicker within his decaying soul, the memory of a brother he could not name. When the warband tried to burn the fortress, the flames failed to take. The stones wept instead. In the great libraries of Ultramar, Lexicanum researching the Great Crusade stumbled upon a scroll written in Roboute Guilliman's own hand. But where a legion's name should stand, the parchment had been purposefully flayed, leaving behind only the faint impression of letters etched deep enough to scar vellum. He ran his fingers over the fragment and felt an emotion Guilliman rarely conveyed: sorrow. That night, the Lexicanum dreamed of an Astartes captain saluting him before stepping into a breach in reality and fading like a dying memory. Even the Black Templars felt the shift. On the void ship Unyielding Creed, a chaplain experienced a vision during a zeal fervor rite. He saw a legionary kneeling before the golden throne itself, forgotten, unspoken, whispering an oath. "We held the line you commanded. We returned to claim the truth you denied." The chaplain woke with a start, horrified. No Astartes would dare accuse the Emperor of denial, not unless the accusation was earned. And in the relic ark's final chamber, the boots finally stopped. Shadows peeled back, revealing a single towering figure in archaic immaculate armor, its design unmistakably of the Emperor's earliest legiones Astartes. The helm slowly lifted, revealing eyes that glowed with the terrible serenity of absolute loyalty. He spoke one phrase that shattered certainty across the galaxy: "We were never lost." "You were." The figure's words rippled through the relic ark like a fracture in time, a wound that refused to close. Those who heard them felt reality lean, as if the Imperium's foundations shifted beneath their feet. The Cadian veteran fell to his knees, clutching his temples as visions not his own poured into him, battlefields drowned in starlight. Oaths sworn in the Emperor's presence, and a final, silent march into oblivion. He felt their grief, their loyalty, their excision. A grief so vast, it eclipsed the deaths of worlds. In that moment, he understood why faith hurts, because belief must endure the truths it cannot bear. In the ecclesiarchal chambers of Ophelia VII, the canoness superior lit a candle in a private chapel, hoping flame would silence doubt. Yet the flame bent unnaturally, drawn toward some invisible presence. She whispered catechisms with trembling lips, but her words felt hollow. She saw again the dream of the unremembered primarch, the sorrow in his posture, the way the Emperor's hands seemed shaped not in command, but in regret. She wondered, for the first time in her life, whether righteousness might be a mask worn over guilt. The thought terrified her more than any demon. The custodian on Luna returned to the sealed vault. Driven by a compulsion he refused to call fear. The mural flickered again, 20 figures now, more distinct than before. He stared at the erased two, their outlines shimmering as if fighting to exist. One figure seemed to turn toward him, a blurred face conveying not accusation but expectation. His breath caught. Custodians were created to guard truth, not question it. And yet he felt something in his gene-forged soul stir an ancient, buried recognition. He whispered a forbidden prayer from the Unification era, and the vault answered with a single resonant heartbeat. Far across the void, the Imperial cruiser that once heard the hymn suffered a psychic backlash. Astropaths convulsed as a fresh wave of harmonics pulsed through their minds, a cadence of war, steady and unbroken, accompanied by a sensation of marching toward a destiny denied. Some crew swore they saw spectral Astartes lining the corridors, silent sentinels who saluted before dissolving into motes of light. The choirmaster wept openly as he whispered, "They're not ghosts. They're remembering themselves through us." Moments later, the ship's Geller field flickered, not from failure, but as though something outside demanded entry. In the Senatorum Imperialis, tensions rotted from within. The Fabricator General demanded a full psychometric scan of the recent anomalies. The Grand Provost Marshal called it paranoia. But the inquisitorial representative spoke quietly. With dread rather than authority, something once removed from the tapestry is stitching itself back in. Silence fell. Even the master of the Administratum felt the weight of the statement. If a legion once struck from history now returned, then every oath, every decree, every foundation stone of the Imperium had been built on a lie. Lies, once exposed, do not die quietly. Beneath Mars, the Magos who survived the Forged Spirit's detonation was tormented by after-images. He wandered the red deserts of memory, recalling the primarch's silhouette reaching into temporal void. The Mechanicus taught absolutes, certainties, sacred equations, but he now felt the shape of something beyond logic. Not chaos, not the Emperor. Something in between, a truth crafted but hidden, too dangerous to remain known. He recorded his final confession before his mind collapsed. They were not erased. They were returned to their maker's shadow. On Ethenia, the penitential pilgrims trembled as the mysterious fortress manifested once more. Sharper, closer, its gun batteries humming with dormant life. Astartes in unmarked armor stood upon its battlements, watching the world below with grim assessment. One pilgrim stepped forward, arms raised in surrender or worship. The figure atop the battlements inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging an old oath. When the distortion vanished, the pilgrim's shadow remained burned into the stone, but the pilgrim himself was gone. Inside the relicarch, the figure in archaic armor approached the survivors. His steps were heavy with millennia. Each footfall echoed with the weight of 1,000 forgotten wars. The Cadian veteran whispered, "What are you?" The giant paused, helm tilting with almost human sorrow. "What you should have been, had the truth endured." As he spoke, hologlyphs blazed to life around them, showing campaigns excised from Imperial lore, legion banners flying beside the Emperor, victories never recorded, sacrifices buried under decree. One image showed the Emperor placing a gauntlet hand upon the Primarch's shoulder, before turning away. In the plague-choked fortress on Barbarus, the Death Guard warband returned to the mural room, only to find every image transformed. The defaced emblems now glowed faintly, restored. The unknown Primarch's face hovered in the torchlight as though alive. One plague marine, older than the Long War itself, felt his corrupted heart seize. He remembered standing beside that figure, centuries before the heresy, before the sickness. A memory surgically removed now, returned in a flood of unbearable clarity. He fell to his knees, not from weakness, but from recognition. On Macragge, Reboot Guilliman studied the flayed parchment the Lexicanum discovered. Under stasis relays and sacred analysis, faint script re-emerged, writing unmistakably his own. His chest tightened as buried recollections surfaced. Brother whose name he had forced himself to forget under their father's command. A brother who did not fall, but was taken. Guilliman whispered a single word, shaking. "Forgive me." The parchment burst into flame, though no ignition source was present. Even the Black Templars felt the pull. The chaplain aboard the unyielding creed returned to the vision unbidden. This time he saw more. The kneeling legionary rose, turning toward a golden light that was not the Emperor but something veiled behind him. The figure spoke, "A," phrase that cracked the chaplain's faith in half. The Emperor did not abandon us. He hid us from himself. And in the relicarch's deepest chamber, the towering warrior removed his helm. His face was neither mortal nor entirely Astartes, a visage shaped by the Emperor's own hand, bearing features reminiscent of multiple primarchs, yet wholly unique. He looked upon the survivors with weary purpose. He made us to correct his greatest mistake. The lumen strips died. The ark shook. And behind the warrior, another silhouette stepped from the void, taller, crowned with a halo of fractured light, its presence unmistakably.
I am Marshall.
The crowned silhouette stepped fully into the relicarch's failing light, and reality seemed to recoil from him. His presence bent the air, not with the warp's corruption, but with the terrible resonance of something forbidden to exist. The archaic warrior bowed his head in reverence to the towering figure, and for a heartbeat, the survivors felt the echo of a bond older than the heresy, a loyalty extinguished by decree, not treachery. The Cadian veteran felt tears he did not remember earning streaked down his face. The Primarch-like being regarded him, and in those eyes he saw millennia of unanswered duty, an agony too vast for any mortal to comprehend. It was the look of a son abandoned by his father, and still willing to obey. Across Ophelia 7, the canoness collapsed before the altar as the ecclesiarchal cathedral shook with a deep, resonant hum. Statues of saints cracked along their seams, as if rejecting the weight of centuries of misremembered truth. Stained glass depiction of the emperor shattered from within, shards falling in perfect formation, as though shaped by an unseen hand into a legionary's sigil. As the canoness crawled toward the shards, she whispered the only prayer left to those who fear they have been lied to by their own God. If I have loved a false light, forgive my blindness. But in the silence that followed, no forgiveness came, only a presence watching. On Luna, the custodian stood frozen as the vault fully awakened. The mural of 20 warriors burned with golden radiance, their features sharpening, their armor gleaming with the Emperor's earliest sigils. Dust fell like ash. The sealed door's locks groaned as though remembering a forgotten obligation. The custodian felt a tremor travel up his spear, a pulse of ancient authority, the kind he had only felt in the Emperor's presence. The vault whispered a command that should not exist. Prepare the way. His knees nearly buckled. Custodians were the Emperor's unbroken will. But what oath could withstand a truth written before oaths were ever sworn? The Imperial cruiser and the Pale Scar spiraled into a storm of temporal distortions. Deck plating buckled as spectral formations marched through bulkheads, moving with the absolute coordination of a legion drilled beyond perfection. Officers clutched their heads as memories rewrote themselves, battles they had never fought now etched into their bones. Victories alongside brothers who should never have existed. The choirmaster screamed as one spectral commander looked directly at him, its gaze both pleading and demanding. The ship's Geller field collapsed entirely for 3 full seconds. Not a single demon entered. Something else kept them out. Within the Senatorium Imperialis, panic no longer hid behind diplomacy. The High Lords argued with venom and fear, voices rising like blades drawn in the throne room. The inquisitorial representative placed an ancient seal upon the table, the sigil of Malcador, the sigillite. Its glow pulsed. This, he whispered, was meant to remain dormant. It awakens only when truth's buried, before the heresy begin to resurface. The master of the administratum faltered. The fabricator general backed away from the sigil as though it were a bomb. Even the Grand Provost Marshal could not hide the tremor in his voice. For the first time in thousands of years, the High Lords admitted they had lost control of history. On Mars, the surviving Magos experienced a final vision before his mind fractured entirely. They saw the Emperor at the height of the Great Crusade, not as a god, but as a father kneeling before 2 sons, sons crafted differently, hidden deliberately, sculpted with a purpose too dangerous to speak aloud. The Magos saw the Emperor sealing them behind a veil not of warp, but of concept, erasing their existence from the universe's own understanding. Not punishment, the Emperor whispered in the vision. Protection. When the Magos regained consciousness, he found the sigils of the unknown legion etched into the flesh of his mechadendrites. On Ethenia, mass hysteria consumed the pilgrims as the fortress manifested again, no longer blurred by distortion, but anchored into real space with roaring gravitic force. Bells shattered. Monasteries crumbled. Astartes in pristine pre-heresy plates stepped through the veil, their boots leaving permanent scorch marks upon the ground. One of them reached down to touch the stone where the pilgrim had disappeared. For a moment, grief crossed his face, the grief of a warrior who had lost an entire galaxy's memory. Then he turned toward the heavens as if awaiting a signal long promised. Within the relic arc, the archaic warrior knelt as the primarch-like figure surveyed the chamber. Lumen strips dimmed around him, as though they feared illumination in his presence, lifted a hand. And hologlyphic panels rearranged themselves into a web of timelines, showing crusade campaigns altered, legion designations rewritten, and a slow, deliberate excision of 2 entire bloodlines. The Cadian veteran croaked, "Why show us this?" The being looked upon him with a sorrow that felt like a funeral hymn for the entire Imperium. "Because you must witness the truth before the choice is made." On Barbarus, the Death Guard warband found the glowing murals shifting again, images now depicting Mortarians standing beside the unknown. Primarch, both expressions solemn, bonded by mutual exile. The corrupted plague marine clutched his head as a lost memory surged forth. A vow of unity sworn between their legions. A pact to stand together should the Emperor's shadow ever turn cold. For the first time since the long war, he felt something break inside him, a fragment of loyalty older than corruption. He roared, not in rage but in grief, shaking the fortress walls. On Macragge, Guilliman summoned no counsel. He sat alone, staring into the scorched air where the parchment had burned. The memories continued to rise, the laughter of a forgotten brother. Battles fought side by side, a final command delivered by the Emperor himself, and Guilliman clenched his fists until blood marked the floor. Duty warred with remorse. The Imperium needed certainty, yet certainty had died the moment the 20th figure stepped from the void. He whispered, almost as a child might, "Father, what have you done?" Aboard the unyielding Creed, the chaplain stood alone in the dark chapel. The vision returned, now complete. The kneeling legionary rose before the throne, but not toward the Emperor. A veil of blinding golden script parted, revealing another presence behind him, vast and sorrowful. "He hid us from the future he feared," the legionary whispered. "But now, the future is here." The chaplain staggered back. If true, then the Emperor's greatest secret was not his sons, it is fear. And in the Relicarch's heart, the towering being spoke again, not with anger, but with quiet, devastating finality. He erased the thing we were created to destroy. The arc trembled violently as a second tier of fractured light opened behind him. And a third silhouette, immense and burning with silent wrath, stepped forward. The shuddering echo of Part 4's final rupture still rolled through the void as the storm of destiny unfurled across the bleeding stars. In the wake of Lorgar's whispered omen, the fractured host of survivors stood suspended between damnation and revelation, their faith raw and trembling, upon the scorched plains of Iskerve, where the earth itself remembered old betrayals. The shattered remnants of the Cadian 144th advanced through drifting veils of atomic dust. Captain Varen felt the ache of a lifetime of broken oaths burning against his breastplate, his gaze fixed on the silhouette of the demon Primarch in the heavens above, a wound in reality shaped like a scripture rewritten in blood. Beneath his boots, the soil muttered with corpse memory, and in those murmurs he sensed that the truth he had pursued across half the segmentum ultima was about to demand its final price. Yet he marched because there was nothing else left to do. Sister Marith knelt in the ruins of the Basilica of St. Syra, her armor cracked, her lips dry with the dust of pulverized sanctity. Around her, firelight danced across shattered frescoes of imperial victory long forgotten. She touched the cracked seal of purity that still clung to her gauntlets, whispering a prayer not for triumph, but for clarity, a clarity forbidden by the ecclesiarchy yet desperately needed now. The spectral afterimage of her vision still lingered, the Emperor's silhouette turning away, his golden light dimming, as though obscured by a veil. She could not speak of it. She scarcely dared to breathe its implication. But as the basilica groaned like a dying thing and shadows lengthened unnaturally, she knew the hour of concealment was ending. A single tear traced down her cheek, carving a path through ash. She rose, bolter heavy in hand, ready to stand against the heresy she feared might bloom within her own heart. Far above the blasted world, battle barge Invictus Spiraire drifted through a storm of psychic distortion, its hull weeping molten tears where reality scraped against it. Librarian Esteban knelt in the dark of the Sanctum Arcanum, his psychic hood flickering as he wrestled with the screaming weight of the warp. He tried to anchor himself too. Memories of duty and of the Imperium's fragile pride, yet every moment of resistance was drowned beneath a vision that would not die of a legion marching in lockstep with shadows, chanting litanies older than the Imperium, following a banner half seen, half imagined. His own voice trembled as he recited words, but each syllable felt thin, brittle. Then came the whisper, "You already know the truth, child of Titan," a voice ancient, dangerous, familiar, his breath caught. For a heartbeat, he felt the warp recoil, not in malice, but in recognition. Something old had noticed him, something that should have remained forever blind. In the subterranean keeps of the Inquisition, Inquisitor Hale waited alone beneath a vault of screaming metal sigils that marked forbidden knowledge. Before him lay the artifact retrieved from the ruins, a splinter of obsidian etched with runes unmistakably Astartes in origin. Yet the language was wrong. Older, he touched it with a gloved hand, and for an instant the air thickened with the stench of burnt ozone and wet blood. The shard pulsed. Hale's heart lurched, not in fear, but in terrible comprehension. The fragment matched no known legion, loyalist or traitor, no records aligned, no archives whispered its lineage. But he had seen the symbol once, buried in a redacted dossier sealed by Malcador himself. A legion erased from the Emperor's memory, purged before the Horus heresy ever burned. As the shard glimmered with a light knot of this time, Hale understood that its resurfacing could fracture the Imperium more violently than any demon invasion. Across the deserts of Iskerve, a choir of astropaths convulsed in unison, their blind faces turned toward a sky writhing like an open wound. Their collective keening rippled through the battlefield, reaching even the most hardened of warriors. Commissar Vellum felt a chill crawl along his spine, and he did not fear easily. The warp scream spoke in fractured pulses, the message broken but unmistakably urgent. He pressed his ear to the voxcaster, though the sound was no longer mechanical, crawled directly into his skull. The lost are rising. The lost are returned. The lost remember. He staggered back, cursing, drawing his bolt pistol as if it might silence the psychic storm tearing at his nerves. But deep down he sensed a darker truth. The cry was not a warning. It was a herald's song. Something long interred had awakened, and it called to the galaxy like an old god reclaiming its temple. Aboard the Invictus Spirair, Chapter Master Redden stood upon the command dais, his jaw clenched with the weight of unspoken dread. The hull reverberated with warp pulses like a heart beating out of rhythm, and his officers exchanged wary glances. Reports flooded in, traitor warbands splintering unexpectedly, demonic manifestations recoiling as if fearing some new presence. Redden stared at the hololithic map as a single unknown sigil pulsed on the periphery of Imperial space, a mark not seen in 10 millennia, yet unmistakable. His gauntlet tightened, remembered that symbol from a forbidden chronicle shown only to newly anointed chapter masters. A legion the Emperor himself had commanded never be spoken of. But now, the sigil was moving, advancing, claiming space like a ghost, reclaiming its forgotten realm. Redden whispered one word under his breath, a word he had vowed never to utter. The bridge lights flickered as though the ship reacted in fear. On the ravaged plains, Captain Varen and Sister Marith converged at the shattered altar of St. Haldron, their forces weary and blood-stained. The statue of the saint had cracked down the center, revealing a hollow chamber within, a chamber that had been sealed since the Great Crusade. As they descended the hidden stair, their footfalls echoed against walls inscribed with runes neither imperial nor heretical. Marith's breath caught as she brushed her gauntlet across a mural, Astartes in unfamiliar heraldry standing beside the Emperor, their armor pale as moonstone. Varen's eyes narrowed. This legion, why were they hidden? He whispered. Before she could answer, the chamber trembled. A burst of blue-white energy rippled through the mural, and a voice from ages past filled the air, sorrowful, resolute, unmistakably Astartes. If you hear this, the Shadow Legion has failed its charge. The ground shuddered violently. They were not alone in the dark. In the warp-scarred heavens, Esteban forced open his mind's eye, despite the psychic agony clawing at him. He glimpsed a battlefield lost to time, pale-armored. Astartes forming a shield wall around the Emperor himself as he battled an entity made of starlight and void. A legion not of pride or ambition, but of silence and sacrifice. Their primarch, a figure with a face obscured in radiance, raised a blade that tore constellations apart. Then the vision twisted. The pale legion knelt, not in victory, but penitence. The Emperor placed his hand upon their helms and erased them, not in rage, but in sorrow. Esteban gasped as he was hurled back into his body. Blood streamed from his eyes as a final whisper followed him back into reality. We were not unmade. We were hidden. And now, librarian, you have found us again. The ship's alarms wailed. Something was docking without permission. In the inquisitorial vault, Hale traced the final rune upon the shard and watched as its glow intensified into a beam that stabbed into the vaulted ceiling. The walls dissolved into images of ancient wars, the Emperor commanding the Pale Legion to bear a secret burden, one that, if revealed, could destabilize the entire Imperial creed. Hale staggered as he saw it clearly. The secret the Emperor had erased was not a betrayal, but a terrible victory. The Lost Legion had defeated a threat that dwarfed even chaos, a threat still lingering beyond the rim of the galaxy. His throat tightened. If the truth spread, the Imperium's faith could implode. Yet if it remained buried, humanity would be unprepared. His decision would shape the future. As he reached for the Vox to deliver his findings, the vault door clicked. Someone had overridden the seals. Hale drew his weapon. Only 3 living beings possessed clearance to breach this sanctum, and 2 of them were dead. The astropathic choir on Iskar 7 fell silent all at once, their bodies dropping like marionettes with cut strings. Commissar Vellum stepped forward, revolted but compelled. One astropath still twitched, her lips forming silent, jerking syllables. He knelt beside her, straining to hear. Then the whisper reached him. Barely sound at all, more like a memory of language. They walk again. Her hand shot up with sudden strength, gripping his collar. Her blind eyes locked onto him with unnatural precision. And they come not as saviors, but as judges. She convulsed once more and collapsed, lifeless. A second later, the sky cracked open with a thunderous roar as a massive vessel emerged, its armor pale and gleaming like bone polished by millennia. Vellum stumbled backward, heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he felt something colder than fear. On the Invictus Spirair, alarms screamed as the docking clamp strained against a colossal boarding craft. Redden unsheathed his blade, flanked by his honor guard as the airlock hissed open. Mist billowed out, cold, metallic, ancient. From the fog emerged Astartes in armor white as void light, their pauldrons marked with the forgotten sigil. Their leader stepped forward, helm retracting to reveal eyes like dying stars. "We return at the Emperor's order," he said, voice calm, heavy, absolute. Redden felt his knees weaken, not from fear, but from the crushing certainty that everything he had ever believed was about to be overturned. The pale warrior extended a data scroll sealed with sigils of the Sigilite himself. "The Imperium stands on a lie," he said, "and the lie ends today." Beneath the ruined altar, Captain Varin and Sister Mirith reached the final chamber, a circular vault lined with sarcophagi, bearing the same pale heraldry. Before they could approach, the vault trembled, and one sarcophagus lit with pale radiance. Stone cracked, metal hissed. A figure rose in Astartes entombed since the Great Crusade, awakening with a breath like a dying star reigniting. His voice was soft but resonant. "You should not have come here," he whispered. "The Emperor hid us for a reason." Varin raised his weapon instinctively. The warrior lifted his gaze. He foresaw the day we would rise again, a day of reckoning. Mireth dared a single question. For whom? The ancient Astartes stepped from the sarcophagus, eyes burning with a terrible purpose. "For all of you," he said, "because the true enemy was never chaos." And above them the world shook as a second pale ship arrived, bearing a sigil none had ever seen. A primarch's sigil, name long erased and now it's no longer forgotten. The pale ships hung above Iskar like omens given metal flesh, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant suns. Yet as the first dawn bled across the ruined world, no armies deployed, no declarations were made, only silence unfurled. Captain Varin and Sister Marith stood before the newly awakened warrior, watching the slow rise of dust motes around him, as if even the air feared breaking the stillness. Outside, The wind whispered through ruined spires, carrying with it memories of countless dead who had prayed for deliverance that never came. The ancient Astartes stepped into the dim morning, gazing upon a galaxy his legion had once defended from threats long forgotten. "All this," he murmured, voiced like a funeral bell, "and still humanity endures." His words held neither hope nor sorrow, only the weight of observation, as if endurance itself were its own curse. High above, aboard the Invictus Spirair, Librarian Esteban watched the pale warriors move through the halls with measured precision. They neither spoke nor brandished arms. They walked like monks in meditation, as though every footfall recalled a vow older than the Imperium that had buried them. Esteban felt echoes in their presence, faint psychic signatures like candles guttering in a cathedral long abandoned. When one brushed past him, he glimpsed a memory not his own, battles fought in starless gulfs, enemies whose forms defied mortal comprehension, a primarch whose face remained veiled by radiance even within recollection. When the vision faded, the warrior turned briefly, as if acknowledging his suffering with a silent nod, and continued onward. Esteban wondered if the galaxy itself would fracture under the burden of truths these revenants carried, truths too ancient to serve the Imperium they once bled for. In the ruins of the Basilica of St. Syra, Marith knelt once more, this time not in prayer, but in mourning. The stained glass that had survived millennia now lay in colorful ruin, crunching beneath her greaves. She touched a shard depicting the Emperor's hand raised in benediction, its edges jagged as broken hope. Her thoughts drifted back to the vision, the Emperor turning away, his light dimming. Was it a warning? A lament? Or simply the echo of human doubt wearing divine shape? The pale legionnaires moved outside, silent as the wind, and Marith wondered whether they, too, once questioned their own erasure. As the basilica's shadows lengthened, she felt a presence not warp-born but memory-made. A voice seemed to tremble at the edge of hearing. "Will you still believe in the light when you learn why it flickers?" She closed her eyes, unable to answer. Inquisitor Hell walked through the vaults beneath Iskra 7, carrying the obsidian shard as though it were a relic too sacred for mortal hands. The pale sigils upon it pulsed faintly, like a forgotten heartbeat. He had not slept since the vault breach. The intruder had disappeared without trace, leaving only the shard awakened and his certainty wounded. As he passed through the tomb-lined corridors, he wondered whether he had already crossed the invisible threshold into heresy simply by knowing what he now knew. The Imperium had endured 10 millennia of blood and fire built on unquestioned belief, yet the shard implied a deeper truth, one that might unravel every cathedral stone by stone. He paused beneath a cracked fresco of the Emperor Triumphant, his reflection warped across the ancient paint.
Ow.
"What price," he whispered, "do we pay for survival? And how many truths must be buried to purchase it?" On the world's blasted plains, Commissar Vellum stood alone, staring at the descending silhouette of the pale Primarch's ship, a vessel shaped like a blade forged for gods. The Commissar felt something he could not name, something beyond fear or awe, insignificance. Around him, the Cadian survivors lowered their weapons, as if instinctively understanding that force no longer mattered. The sky dimmed as the ship's shadow passed over them, and Vellum wondered what kind of being would step forth, a savior, specter, or simply a remnant of a bygone age with no place in the burning galaxy of the present. As dust spiraled around him, he recalled every speech he had given about duty, loyalty, the Emperor's eternal plan, and felt, for the first time, the fragile hollowness beneath those words. If the Imperium had rewritten its own origins, what else had it rewritten? Aboard the pale vessel, the Primarch stirred from stasis. His armor hummed with the low thrum of forgotten technology, inscriptions shifting like script written in living light. The chamber around him exhaled ancient air as seals unlatched. He opened his eyes slowly, not with the fury of reborn demigods, but with the sorrow of one who remembers too much. He stepped from the cradle, his gaze sweeping across a galaxy he had once sworn to protect from threats that humanity no longer even had a name for. His first words were not a declaration, nor a command. "I return to a galaxy that has forgotten me," he said quietly, "and I fear it has forgotten why I was sent." His aura filled the chamber like a cold dawn, illuminating relics of wars unspoken. Even his own sons bowed in somber silence, as if unsure whether awakening him had been mercy or doom. Varen and Mareth approached the awakened legionnaire atop a ridge overlooking the ruined plains. The air tasted of ash and ancient promises. The warrior regarded the horizon with an expression carved from centuries of slumber. "The Emperor foresaw a choice," he said, his voice reverberating through the stones beneath their feet. "A moment when the Imperium must decide whether survival outweighs truth." His helm angled toward them. That moment approaches. Marith's breath caught. She wanted to ask what fate awaited them, what role the Forgotten Legion intended to play, whether their return heralded salvation or judgment. But the words refused to form. The Astartes' gaze softened, not with comfort, but with resignation. "We rise not to rule," he said, "but to remind humanity of the war it has already forgotten." Behind them, a tremor shook the earth, as though something vast had opened its eyes beneath the planet's crust. Esteban found himself wandering the upper decks of the Invicta Spiraire, following echoes that did not belong to the living. Every corridor seemed suffused with aftermages of battles fought beyond mortal comprehension, shapes moving within the steel, shadows whispering of starless gulfs. He stopped near a viewport, staring out at the pale fleet now arrayed like a silent judgment above Iskar 7. "If they were erased for our protection," he whispered, "what horror did they hold at bay?" For the first time, he sensed something stirring beyond the fleet, a pressure in the warp, not hostile, but aware, watching, waiting. And he wondered whether the Emperor himself felt its approach across the golden silence of the throne. A chill passed through him, and as he looked closer, he saw a faint shimmer on the stars, as though something vast and unseen moved between them, tracing the old paths the Forgotten Legion once walked. Inquisitor Hale emerged into the open air as the pale primarch's ship completed its descent. Winds whipped his coat around him, and ash spiraled upward like ascending spirits. His eyes burned with the weight of knowledge no mortal should carry. The primarch descended the ramp with measured steps, his presence warping the very atmosphere with restrained divinity. Hale bowed instinctively, whether from reverence or terror, he could not tell. The primarch paused, regarding him with a gaze deeper than judgment. "Inquisitor," he said softly, "you seek answers, but answers are wounds." Hale swallowed. "Why were you hidden?" The primarch's eyes dimmed with old grief. "Because we fought a truth the Imperium could not survive knowing." He stepped past Hale, earth trembling beneath each step. "Pray that truth still sleeps." Hale felt his knees weaken as the primarch's words lingered like a tolling funeral bell. As the sun fell behind the ruins of Iskar 7, the pale legion gathered in formation, their white armor glowing with faint twilight radiance. The Cadian survivors watched in reverent silence, as if witnessing the last chapter of a saga forgotten before it was ever written. The primarch raised his hand, and the air stilled. No speech followed, no banners unfurled. Only silence, profound and absolute. The kind that settles over worlds on the brink of remembrance. Mareth felt her throat tighten. Varen bowed his head. Even the wind seemed to stop, suspended in anticipation of something ancient awakening within the bones of the galaxy. And then, slowly, solemnly, the Pale Legion turned north, toward the uncharted void beyond Imperial space, toward something calling them home. Night settled. Stars emerged like distant candles in a cathedral sky. The survivors dispersed, each carrying questions that gnawed like quiet wounds. What threat demanded the return of a legion erased by divine will? What truth lay in the dark beyond the rim, waiting like a forgotten prayer? Mareth walked alone among the ruins, her hand brushing the cracked walls of the basilica. She wondered whether faith was meant to endure unbroken, or whether fractures were inevitable if humanity was ever to see clearly. Varen watched the pale fleet rise, engines humming a dirge older than any hymn. Inquisitor Hale stood beside him, clutching the obsidian shard as though it were the last anchor of meaning in a sea of unraveling certainties. "What happens now?" Varen asked quietly. Hale did not answer. Some questions were meant only to be carried. As the pale fleet vanished into the night, a single fragment of starlight drifted downward, shimmering before dissolving into dust above the ruins. Esteban watched it from afar, sensing something shift, something subtle, profound, irreversible. The galaxy felt different, though nothing visible had changed. A presence had departed, leaving a hollow space in its wake, like the silence after a cathedral choir's final note fades. Across the war-scarred plains, survivors began to rebuild fires, prepare reports, tend to their wounded. Life resumed with weary familiarity, yet every soul felt it. The faint tremor of destiny's page turning. And somewhere beyond the sight of mortal eyes, something stirred not in malice, but in remembrance. An old oath awakening, a faint promise reigniting, the void whispered, as if asking a question no mortal could answer. When all truths are revealed, will humanity still endure? Or will endurance itself prove the final, unforgivable sin? In the end, only the remembrancer remained awake, ink running low as starlight faded outside the shattered window. Quill in hand, he recorded the last lines of a chronicle no one might ever believe. Around him, the ruins of Iskervi slept beneath a blanket of dust, illuminated by a thin crescent moon. He whispered to himself as he wrote, "The forgotten have risen, and the galaxy trembles in the hush they leave behind." His hand paused. He looked up, sensing the weight of history resting upon the silence. The pale fleet was gone. The primarch's purpose remained unspoken, and the Imperium, vast and wounded, marched onward into a future shaped by shadows no scripture had prepared it for. He dipped the quill one final time. "Witness this," he murmured, "in the name of those who will never be remembered." And as the chronicle's final words dried on the page, he looked toward the viewer, toward you, and whispered, "Stand witness. Like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments so the echoes of this tale may endure in the void."